Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase had a monster season last year, but they'll need to replicate that to be worth this year's draft cost. We discussed the top three fantasy storylines for the Cincinnati Bengals and 25, and today's Locked On Fantasy Football.
You are Locked On Fantasy, your daily NFL fantasy podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into the Locked On Fantasy Football Podcast. I'm one of your co-hosts, Michelle Magdziuk, and when I'm not doing this, I'm a researcher and fantasy analyst with NFL Network.
And I'm your other co-host, Vinnie Iyer. When I'm not doing this, I'm writing about NFL fantasy and betting for sportingnews.com.
Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Today, we're going to be discussing everything Cincinnati Bengals. We are still going through our every team, 32 teams, giving them one episode just to solely focus on their top three storylines going into next season. And today, we got the Bengals. I mean, we all know what a great offense they are, right? So many elite fantasy assets on this team, starting with Joe Burrow at quarterback. With Jamar Chase, he's going as a 101 in drafts this year after his monster season. Tee Higgins had a breakout year. Chase Brown, fully became the Bengals, workhorse back in that second half of the season. So we have to figure out which of these guys have the best values. Who do we want on our teams? Who can come through for the second straight year? So let's start here with Joe Burrow because he is right now ranked as the quarterback 5 coming off draft boards behind just Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, Jaden Daniels, and Jalen Hurts. Now, the common denominator between those 4 guys I just said is that they're all really, really good rushers, right? They get a lot of rushing yards, rushing touchdowns, and then also put up the passing production as well. With Joe Burrow, you just have, maybe one of the best passers in the NFL right now. But he was the quarterback 3 in points per game last year, behind only Lamar Jackson and Josh Allen. Do you think that Joe Burrow is worth that quarterback 5 cost?
Well, I think you have to do a little bit of a line of separation. It's unofficial, right? Between the running quarterbacks, Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen, Jane Daniels, Jalen Hurts. And then you draw a line, and then you get to who do I want to take next? Who would I trust to elevate themselves just by pure passing alone with just enough running to get into the top 4? So then you look at Joe Burrow, then you look at Baker Mayfield from last season. You look around, there's not many pocket passers who can get there and give us the numbers that we're looking for. That's why we're digging deeper and trying to find a value with Caleb Williams, and that's why Bo Nix was effective last year. So we're looking for somebody that could pad their passing totals enough with running to get up there and really inflate their numbers. I think Joe Burrow is the most trustworthy of all these pocket passers for sure. And he does have the upside to finish as the QB1 overall. So that's what you're looking at. And I think you also look, it actually might be between him and you look a little bit down in Mahomes, right? Like I know Mahomes has been down, but the weapons right now for Mahomes are coming together nicely, right? If you look at Rashee Rice and you avoid suspension, then all of a sudden you got Xavier Worthy, Rashee Rice, Travis Kelce, and then you're looking at weapons on the outside that can rival what we've seen in Cincinnati with Jamar Chase and Tee Higgins, and of course in Tampa, which elevated to Baker Mayfield with Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, and the like. So one thing I do think is the Bengals, I don't know if their defense is going to be improved. They're in a weird situation with Trey Hendrickson. They're playing hard balls, weirdly, with the rookie Shamar Stewart, who's going to help Trey Hendrickson or be a contingency if he leaves. So I'm not sure how good this defense is going to be. They did make a wholesale change, bringing in Al Golden to lead the defense. So if that's the case, this team is going to be chucking a ton and trying to win some really high-scoring games. And we know there are going to be some high-scoring games. Ravens in the division, but all around when we try to put them in their schedule, there are a lot of games where Joe Burrow is going to have to throw a ton, and this offense is going to have to keep scoring to keep up with some teams. And that is the biggest thing here that we look at is Joe Burrow capable of 5,050. I think there's a handful of guys out there that can put up 5,000 passing yards. We know Joe Burrow can do that. The 50 is the big one, right? Can you push towards 50? That's 40 to 50 touchdown passes. I really think that's in the cards as well. So if I was going to take a shot, and let's say he's a better value than maybe those running quarterbacks ahead, where we know you're not going to get much there, but with Joe Burrow, you could actually get 4 spots ahead in his final score.
Yeah, and honestly, the last 2 seasons that he's been healthy, right? 2023, he only played 10 games, dealt with the health concerns with his wrist. But the last 2 seasons, it's been identical scoring. It was 21.9 points per game last year as a quarterback, 3 in points per game. And then in 2022, it was 21.9 points per game. He was a quarterback 4. So I do think the quarterback 5 ranking is plenty fair. And then they also now, tied up Jamar Chase and Tee Higgins to these long, big contracts. And what's nice about Joe Burrow is that if one of these guys goes down, it's really not like his production drops all that much. Last year, when he didn't have Tee Higgins and just Jamar Chase, he was still averaging 20.2 points per game. That's still fantastic. But when he had both, he was averaging 23.5 points per game. Now, if he's going to do that this year or even come close to it, he's going to be well worth that quarterback 5 ranking. And when you look to see, he's really at kind of a great spot to take him overall, right? Because when you're taking the Jalen Hurts or the Jaden Daniels or the Josh Allens, you're still choosing them over some really great pieces. Even Jalen Hurts going last among that group right now in the Jaden Daniels, Hurts, Lamar Jackson. You still have to choose Hurts over like James Cook or a George Kittle or a Devontae Adams. But when you get to Joe Burrow, which isn't that much further down, I mean, going right after him is Courtland Sutton, Zay Flowers, James Conner, DK Metcalf, Devonta Smith. I'm fine with going with Joe Burrow there. I do actually think that's a very fair cost for him. And yes, you have to count on the touchdowns, but they're going to come. And as you said, I don't think they did enough to fix this defense this year. Sure, he doesn't have to throw a ton. And I just actually think he's going to be worth this cost.
Yeah, I think the consistency, as you mentioned, is also there. This offense, we know what it is at this point, even though they've had some changes in terms of Brian Callahan leaving last year. But it's still Zach Taylor. They want to throw the ball quite a bit, and they're going to throw it, and they're not going to be ashamed to throw it if that's how they need to win games. So that's a good thing. And the other, what you mentioned, yeah, that's kind of a good vibe to have, right? If you think you have somebody with upside, if you're getting to players like a Devonta Smith or DK Metcalf, we've talked about them in recent shows, that you might be, okay, capped. We know what we're going to get. Well, Joe Burrow has a little bit of upside at quarterback where you're not going to get that again, as Michelle mentioned. If you take it to the other quarterback, you're probably going to get a finish close to what you picked that quarterback for, and then you will miss out on players. So the real goal of any draft is to maximize value with each pick and be better than the field at that position. And with Joe Burrow, you could have that advantage because there's a chance Baker Mayfield could drop off. There's a chance that some of these guys behind are not going to deliver. And Joe Burrow might be in a tier by himself after those guys that you take as the cheat code quarterbacks who are really producing right now in fantasy.
Yeah, and after Joe Burrow, and you mentioned Patrick Mahomes, the difference between Mahomes and Burrow right now is that Burrow has 2 of the best wide receivers in the league, right?
Yeah.
And we're going to talk about those 2 guys because they both finished top 4 in average scoring last season with Jamar Chase destroying the whole group of wide receivers in points per game. And that's why he is now the consensus 101 in drafts. But who's actually the better value? Is it taking Jamar Chase 101? Or is it Tee Higgins, who is going as a wide receiver 13 after finishing as the wide receiver 4 on average last season? We have to figure that all out, and we will do that right after we hear from one of our sponsors. This episode of Locked On Fantasy Football is brought to you by the Game Time app. Buying tickets to your favorite event should not be stressful. Game Time is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater near you. With killer deals on last-minute tickets and their best price guarantee, you can stop stressing over the tickets and start getting hyped for the fun you'll have. It's the fastest-growing ticketing app in the country for a reason. I just bought tickets for the Astros on Sunday, looking around on all the apps, and Game Time is just, they have the cheapest tickets, and their app is so easy to use. And you don't get those surprise, random additions to your costs at the end when you're trying to, cash out. And you can buy tickets in a matter of seconds, 2 taps and you're set. You get to see your seat before you arrive, so you know exactly what you're buying. And no shock there. And then they have the best ticket coverage in the business in case anything goes wrong. You get to take the worries and the guessing work out of buying tickets with Game Time. Just download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDON NFL. That's LOCKEDON NFL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time. All right, let's get into these wide receivers for the Bengals because maybe the best wide receiver duo in the league right now. And you got Jamar Chase sitting there as a wide receiver one cost and going 101 in consensus rankings ahead of, the Bijan Robinson, Saquon Barkley, Justin Jefferson. And then you have Tee Higgins sitting there as wide receiver 13. Now, he was the wide receiver 4 in points per game last season at 15.5 points per game. So you had both Jamar and Tee Higgins top 4. Tee Higgins has struggled to stay healthy over the last couple of years. And overall, when you look at his full seasons, he's never had like a monster yardage season, but did have a career high 10 receiving touchdowns last year. What are your thoughts? Let's start with Jamar Chase. Is he worth the 101, Vinny?
I think he is not a bad pick at 101. Will he deliver as the 101? The odds are probably against that, right? I mean, you're finishing again with the same type of season. You win the Triple Crown. I mean, we had Cooper Kupp just do this a few years ago, and he didn't come back and do what he did the following year. Now, granted, Cooper Kupp was starting to get close to 30 and was just ending his prime, while Jamar Chase is entering his prime. So he could definitely win the Triple Crown again, but do we think he's going to do it with the same numbers? I mean, that's a lot to ask for in back-to-back seasons. I mean, when you have a career year, they call it a career year for a reason because you don't duplicate it very often, right? So was that a career year? Was that a new bar that he's raised that he's going to be consistent at? But you think it has to come down, right? I mean, you have Tee Higgins. You mentioned Tee Higgins' health. Like, if he plays more games, you'd figure there's less targets for Jamar Chase to go around those games, and they're more evenly distributed between the guys. And there's still no real addition or subtraction wide receiver. They have very few vacated targets. So that status quo is going to be there. And basically what's going to happen is they get redistributed. And Higgins is going to be more involved when he plays more. Naturally, he's going to play 5 more games. He's going to get a lot more targets, right? And they only have so many targets they can throw in a given game. So when we look at that overall, I look at saying, look, there's only one way for Jamar Chase to go. If you take him at 101, the first wide receiver off the board, the first player off the board, only anywhere to go but down. But when you look at Tee Higgins, I mean, the scoring says he was a top 10 wide receiver, even if you had projected all his games and did everything through it. I mean, he was on pace for like 14 touchdowns last year, more than 100 receptions, nearly 1,300 yards when his season got kind of up and down with the injuries, right? So I think when you look at it, Tee Higgins should be the better value because I think he carries as much upside. I think he is a guy built to score touchdowns as well. So I was surprised he didn't hit double digits before last season. I think he can do that again to help his value, and that's a really fast way to get there, right? Each touchdown is 60 yards free. So when you get that, I think Higgins is the much better value because, again, you can get a top 12 wide receiver, which there's not too many of those that you can trust, and you can get him without using the very first pick. And hey, you could get Higgins, get that running back early, and then your team is still pretty loaded with your scoring potential at the first 2 positions.
Yeah, I mean, with Jamar, I don't think you're going to regret taking him at the 101.
No.
I don't think that's going to happen, but I don't think it's repeating 17 receiving touchdowns or even getting close to that. That's so hard, even for the best scoring, even for the best offenses. Like, if he hits 12 again, that will be awesome, right? So, and that's 5 fewer touchdowns just right there. I am going to just lean more of the Bijan Robinson route because I think that's easier for, like, there's a lot of routes for him to even get better than last year for Bijan Robinson. With Jamar Chase, it's not really possible. I mean, maybe you put up 20 touchdowns and that's, 1,800 yards again, but that's really hard to ask for. With Tee Higgins, the biggest concern is the health, right? He missed 5 games each of the last 2 years. He needs to be able to stay healthier. But in the 10 games that Tee Higgins saw at least 6 targets last year, he averaged 17.5 points per game. That would have only been behind Jamar Chase last year in points per game. It would have been well ahead of everyone else behind him. But even just looking at guys just in their games with 6+ targets last year, right? It went Jamar Chase at the top with 20.8 points per game that he averaged in those games. Puka Nacua second at 17.7. And then Tee Higgins at 17.5. The next 2 are Mike Evans and Justin Jefferson. So when Tee Higgins got the workload, was able to stay on the field healthy, he was a monster. And I don't really see that changing all too much. I think Tee Higgins is a really great wide receiver. I think he gets a lot of help too from Jamar Chase taking away coverages. I mean, defenses are just more scared of him, and Joe Burrow trusts him. So I do agree with you. I think that Tee Higgins is the much better value right now. He's going, just ahead of Tyreek Hill and Mike Evans, just behind Ladd McConkey and Drake London and Jackson Smith-Njigba. I get that Drake, Ladd, and JSN are all wide receiver ones on their team, while Tee Higgins is a wide receiver too. But I might actually prefer Tee Higgins over those guys.
Yeah, all wide receiver twos are not created equal, and let's say that. And this wide receiver two, adding to the Higgins love here, is when Tyler Boyd was out of the equation, and he was a key factor. Let's not forget, he was a key third receiver working mainly out of the slot. We thought they would replace him, right? And we've seen Andreas Savas and Jermaine Burton. These guys have not lived up to that reputation of possibly being that dedicated slot guy that can help. Then we looked at Mike Gesicki. Oh, they're going to throw to Mike Gesicki a lot at tight end. Well, they occasionally throw to him, much like they did before with their previous tight ends, right? They were just like CJ like in situational games in the right matchups, we're going to find them in the end zone. But what's happened is that you don't get very many receivers that are number two that are basically splitting the key target share with their number one, right? There's no third guy. There's no tight end that's going to consistently eat into that. And then you don't have a lot of number two receivers playing with Joe Burrow and the volume of this Bengals passing offense. So again, we can look at number one versus number two on a team, but then you have to just take away, just don't factor in Chase when you're weighing Higgins against the other. So does Higgins have an elite quarterback? Is he going to get a lot of key target share? Is he a talented receiver who can line up in a lot of places, finish in the red zone, make a few plays? All the answers are yes there, right? And that should say, okay, let's now just weigh all that against, say, a Tyreek Hill. Like if Tua Tagovailoa is back to dinking and dunking, if Hill is having diminished returns, like I don't know, right? That would just say Tee Higgins is the better one. So same thing, pros and cons. Just don't go into like, oh, this guy's his first target, this is the second, so he possibly can't be the better value.
I have an interesting question for you. Would you rather Bijan Robinson and Tee Higgins or Jamar Chase and Breece Hall?
Well, we know Breece Hall is a little bit risky, so I think Tee Higgins a little say, well, Higgins has got the injury issues, but I would take Bijan and Higgins because I just like Bijan's potential this season. And I think the Bijan versus Hall really does it for me here, right? Higgins is not as big of a drop off or potential from Chase as Hall could be from Robinson.
Exactly. And that's kind of what we're getting at here. So I think I'd rather that duo too. And you could choose the other running backs going around that, James Cook, Chase Brown, but it was the same team, so I didn't go with that. But I think I'm leaning more. I'm probably, if I have the 101, I'm probably not going to go with Chase again. I don't think it's a bad pick though. And then I do really like Tee Higgins' value here. We have to discuss Chase Brown because that second half of the season was fantastic for him once he took over the full workload and had that backfield to himself. Will the team stick with that or not? That's what we have to figure out. But right now he's going as the running back 12. I think that's a great cost for him. So we'll discuss Chase Brown and his fantasy future right after we take a quick break. I want to thank you all for making Locked On Fantasy Football your first listen today. For your second listen, check out the Locked On NFL Scouting. The NFL draft is over, but the roster moves and news never stop. Host Kyle Krabs and Joe Marino will make you the most informed NFL fan this offseason. Find Locked On NFL Scouting on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. All right, let's finish up today's show talking about Chase Brown and his fantasy outlook for the 2025 season. Right now, he's ranked as the running back 12. He finished as the running back 16 on average last year with 14.3 points per game. However, the second half of the season is when he officially took over the backfield once Zach Moss got hurt. He didn't have to split it anymore. Everything was going to him. And he was averaging 18.3 points per game from weeks 9 through 18. That was fifth among running backs behind only Saquon Barkley, Jahmyr Gibbs, Bijan Robinson, and Josh Jacobs. So, I mean, his running back 12 cost seems very, very fair as we sit here in June. The team really hasn't added anybody.
Yeah, and we want to read into that a little bit, right? I mean, the team didn't add anyone. There were some rumors that they were going to take it back pretty high. And the Zach Moss injury concern was one of them, right? Basically, his year was wiped out as he came over from his super sub role with the Colts, right? He was with the Bills and Colts, and he's had a lot of upside. And we thought, okay, it's going to be a pretty clear cut split backfield between these two guys situationally. Well, it wasn't an option because Moss went down. So I'm not sure how Moss is doing right now in terms of injury updates. Like he's on track, I guess, but then you look at Samaje Perine, he's an old Bengals favorite here that's in the mix, but we know what his role is from previous teams with Joe Mixon. So what this would tell me is they see Chase Brown as potential Joe Mixon part two, right? They're okay giving him the key touches here, bringing in Perine for a few receiving snaps, bringing in Moss for a few kind of the power snaps or whatever, and just giving Chase Brown a breather because he's a smaller back. He reminds me a lot of Austin Eckler when he first came in. He's kind of a guy that can be a very effective receiver, but also a very effective red zone runner to close the deal. So again, I think they like him. And why would you mess with what they did well, right? The second half of last season, they were on fire. I mean, you had big games from Jamar Chase. They were really rolling here with Chase Brown. So I don't think they want to mess with what was working. I mean, offense was not the problem in Cincinnati last year. It was defense down the stretch, 100%. It was historically bad last year. So I think they'll be careful, Chase Brown. The handcuff situation is going to be pretty cloudy between those two guys, with Moss and Perine having maybe different situational roles. But in terms of straight up value, I think they're going to treat Brown more like a 20 touch per game back.
Yeah, I mean, that's what he was getting last year in that second half of the season, 23.6 touches per game from weeks 9 through 18,
Yeah.
an insane workload. I will say what makes me even feel better about Chase Brown is that you're not reliant on rushing touchdowns with him, even though they should be able to come, right? He's on a really good offense with scoring opportunities, but he only had 3 rushing touchdowns from that span that I'm talking about, weeks 9 through 18, when he was a monster in fantasy. It's nice that he was producing that well without it being just a bunch of rushing touchdowns. So it's not like those can come and go, but you don't even have to worry about that. I do really like having a fantasy running back that it's not just dependent on if they score or not. Now, when you look at his ranking at running back 12, he's going after, Josh Jacobs, Bucky Irving, Kyron Williams, and then right before Breece Hall and James Cook. I'm going to give you 3 guys here. So Chase Brown, Kyron Williams, James Cook. Rank those 3.
Yeah, I think I'm going Kyron Williams, Chase Brown, James Cook.
Is that the order you're going to go in?
Yeah.
Kyron Williams, I just think is way too underappreciated. I might go James Cook, though, over Chase Brown.
James Cook is an interesting one because I think there's a lot of buzz, and we'll get to seeing a little bit more about what happens with the contract here at some point. But he's interesting because he can score a lot of touchdowns. He could be the clear lead guy there. So again, James Cook is a harder guy that I have right now, but I'd say if you look at the pure competition, I think there's definitely a case to be made for Cook. I just like Brown and the offense he is. And what really gives you pause on James Cook is he has a quarterback who can steal a ton of touchdowns from him.
Yeah, and both as a passer and a rusher, right? Like Chase Brown does have a quarterback that will steal a ton of touchdowns from him as a passer, but at least then when he gets near around the goal line, right? Now, it does depend on if Zach Moss is back. We'll see. Maybe he gets the goal line carries. It's been very, very quiet around the Zach Moss injury. It was a neck injury.
Yeah.
It's not like we have a lot of information. We don't even know if he's going to be available for the season or not. But the team didn't put in we thought maybe they'd be aggressive with trying to add a running back to this backfield. They were not at all. So clearly they feel comfortable with Chase Brown, or maybe they feel comfortable Moss will come back to give them some depth. But this seems like it's going to be Chase Brown's backfield to own, to have a ton of workload. So I do think his running back 12 cost is very, very fair. I probably wouldn't put him much higher than this, looking at the guys above him, but I also wouldn't put him lower. So I think maybe consensus has him perfectly right at this moment. But that will be it for today. We will be back on Monday talking about the Baltimore Ravens and then finishing up the AFC North with the Cleveland Browns next Wednesday. Remember, in June, we're just doing 3 shows a week, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. We'll be back to every single day starting back up in July. I hope you all have a great weekend. Have a very happy Father's Day, and we'll talk to you on Monday. Bye, y'all.